So I took the Supermoto out to a meet recently we were doing in Dallas, and then there was a bit of a Goonie Supermoto ride afterwards, and I'd love to show you some clips of that, but every time I seem to actually get on one of these bikes and ride it, YouTube decides that that is not going to fly. DANK wheelie crashed, and there was quads everywhere. It was actually pretty terrifying. But I was getting oil in the air box. So I know why it's happening and we need to fix it, but first I would like to explain it. Hello children, I'm Mr. J. I've been wanting to get one of these for so long to like explain things. I've always been like, nope, I'm just gonna sound like engineering explained or something, but it's incredibly helpful. So let's explain what's going on here. Let me do a little drawing for you. In the case of our XR, this is 650 cc's every time this piston goes to the first part down on its intake stroke. That's how big of a volume of area. So it's pulling in that much air and fuel mixed in there. But what's also happening on the bottom side of the engine, it's also having to display that same amount of air and then pulling it back in. What they do is they're going to take the crankcase down here, they're going to vent it to the air box. So as the engine's running, we've got air pushing and pulling constantly. Because you also always have a little bit of blow-by. I don't care if it's a brand new engine or perfectly broken in, whatever it is, you're always gonna get a little bit of blow-by. Hopefully just a little bit. If your engine's wore out, you can have a lot more of this. So instead, you've got this breath of air kind of going back and forth, plus a little bit more probably pushing out due to the blow-by in the engine. And we vent that into the air box. You know, it's already a filtered thing. That way, in case we're pulling any air back in, as it's pulling air back in, we know it's nice filtered air. We don't have to get any dirt and crap down here in the bottom of the engine. Another element here is we have a little bit of oil, you know, down in the bottom of the engine. Bikes like, especially like this XR, it's running what's called like a dry sump. So you actually have frame over here. The front of the frame is actually holding, you know, the majority of the oil. So you have a pump that takes this oil back into the frame, and then another one that pressurizes the system. So we don't have like a ton of oil down in the motor, but we do have some. And you know, you got your gears right here. This is meant to represent your transmission gears right here. You got your crankshaft with a ton of other little gears and whatnot going on in here. And so this oil in the bottom, as it's, you know, coming back down through the motor, it's hitting all this stuff in here, and it's getting kind of spun up. You know, there'll be little particles of oil all throughout the motor. Light mist of oil's going all around the motor, right? And so some of that oil can make it up into the breather. Now we don't want a bunch of oil going back in the breather and down into the intake, so the engineers will make this pipe slightly uphill. And since it's not a whole lot of oil, it's just a little bit, just having a little bit of a downhill run will make all this oil drop back into the motor typically. You might get a little bit misted out here at the top, but a little bit's fine. You know, you don't want big globs of oil going down in the air box. The problem is when we take this design and both like figuratively and literally turn it on its side, the oil that was down in here collects back here. Now this is churning up in the gears back here. Instead of having just a little bit of misted oil, it's got big globs of oil. Where previously this was very uphill, now it's not. So much more likely for oil to make it all the way back and drop into our air box. So we want to modify this in a way it still works good when it's in the normal position, which is how it's really going to be most of the time. You know, I don't care how good your wheel is, you're not constantly on the wheel. Well, I guess there are some riders. Most of us are still going to need it to work properly in the normal configuration, as well as if we're tipped back doing some wheelies. So the way I'm going to try here is the first method that I always try on bikes, and normally it works. There's a few other methods you can go to like kind of take this to a more extreme level. Essentially, we're going to delete out probably about the middle of the pipe like this, the breather hose. We're going to try to do something like this. Here's our modified system with the air running up and around this loop we've made in it. If we keep this still as much as we can, this first bit at a slight downhill when we're in the running position, any oil that comes up in this will still work down. We're still going to have the oil up against the transmission when you're doing a wheelie. There's not much we can do about that. So we're still going to get these big globs of oil with that breath of air going in and out. It's going to throw some of this oil up in this pipe. What we're hoping is that this pipe is long enough, and we've added this extra uphill section that even when we're doing a wheelie, well, this is really uphill now when we're doing a wheelie, we're hoping that the oil will then want to sort of separate from the air and work its way back down into the motor. Once it gets over this loop here, it can still obviously get back into the motor, although it's going to have this low point. We try to avoid a low point in it here because this gives it a place for oil to get trapped, but it's really hard typically to make it fully like a straight sort of V. I mean, ideally you'd have it some kind of like high point here, And so you have it kind of V'ing and V'ing back down, so it's always have it downhill. But you'll just find there's almost never enough room to actually do that. Like I said, most bikes, by doing this alone will fix the problem. I mean, as you can imagine, when you're doing a wheelie, this is really uphill now for that oil to try to run. So any globs of oil are just going to want to naturally fall back down into the motor, even with that big breath of air ripping back and forth. The other method, if this isn't working, we can basically take this even higher, the loop here. You can try to go like around the frame of the bike at the top, but it does get tight up there with the handlebars and the suspension. You can't always make that work as well as you think you would. Also add what some people would call a catch can. I'm not going to call it that because it's not actually using it like a catch can, but some sort of expansion thing. And I've made one of these before using honestly just a piece of PVC. You just want something like this, and this could be really anywhere along the lines of the system here. It sort of gives it an area for the oil if it is making its way all the way up this pipe. Gives it a place to kind of separate from the air and then work its way back down. So if in other words, if it's got a big volume of air pushing up behind it, hits that point, it can sort of separate, the air goes by, the oil goes back down. That's what you're trying to do there with that. Literally, I've built one of these with like some small little PVCs before and some caps, and it worked great. There's also the possibility of running this up high and just putting a small breather filter up here and just capping off the other end. And so for right now, that's what we're gonna try to do. Y'all like my hat? This is the stock breather hose going back here to the air box. Obviously, it kind of tucks behind here through the subframe. Went down to AutoZone and got us some transmission line of all things. It's the right inner diameter, and we've got some little connectors. Transmission line's pretty good because this is fairly flexible, but it also doesn't want to crimp too easy. If you get stuff that's, close to what your bike came with, this is like kind of folded and made. It's very hard to like rebend this. I mean, you can, but it likes to crease really easily. If you go to stuff that's real thick, heavy duty, it's too hard to bend. Transmission line seems to be, it just works, and it's overkill for an intake system. I mean, it's going to be fairly close to our exhaust right up here where I plan to put it, but transmission line can easily handle the temperatures. It's something like this. Well, part one is we got to cut this guy up. Full commit, man. Trying to figure out the part I want to cut it at. This comes out of here. I'm thinking this will connect in right here. Cut it up right here where I got it marked with my thumb. Never cut towards your own self, unless you're me. When the guy asked me how much I wanted this at the store, I told him 3 feet, thinking that'd be more than enough. And I think I'm going to need every single bit of this. Try to get the bottom hose here, the one that feeds back to the air box. We don't want it to have a big loop like this in it because oil will get trapped in this low bit if it actually makes it all the way up and around the loop. I mean, it's not the end of the world if that happens, but if you can try to keep this a little higher, it's a little less likely to happen. Plus, we get to take advantage of our loop going as high as we can get it like that too. And the higher this is, the better. I always try to like rotate my zip ties around, but I think I made these ones so tight, I don't think it's gonna be possible. But I always like to cut them as tight as I can with a razor blade so that you don't nick your finger on any of these. I had someone tell me about how they get stitches one time for a little nub hanging off one of these. That sounded terrible, so I've always tried since then to really trim these things up. Right, so we get this in here kind of like that. Keep it where it's not touching the exhaust, the radiator. Should be fine with the tank shroud piece coming over it. So how we're gonna secure that? We wanna secure this to this, and we don't wanna do it like a caveman and just put a big zip tie around the whole thing. We want it to actually look pretty clean. Before we crank that zip tie down, we'll run another one through that zip tie. Little zip tie goes around the big zip tie. We'll let the little one hold its guy down. Neither one of these are super tight. They don't need to be. They're just sort of snug down. One's got coolant running through it, and one's gonna have air running through it, so you don't need to like crush them. That would be no good. There is space between this hose and the radiator. I feel like on camera it's hard to see that, but there's like probably a good 1/2 inch right here. That's all pretty good. When we put our tank shroud on, yeah, that should just press down. That's a pretty good uphill run that oil now has to make. And one more time, just make sure we're all on the same page. The breather used to run straight up from here back to there. Now, using special effects, we'll now simulate the dankest of dank wheelies. Oh yeah, look at that. Okay, so as you can see, this was no good. Now we have to go all the way up here. And by then, most of that oil's gonna just fall back down. It's a lot of uphill for that oil to have to try to run. Air will escape from the oil. The air will then come back around here, down like this, and into the air box.
If there's any questions, please comment below.
Check this out, it's the Collin Creek Mall. They're tearing it down. I thought I've got to try to come over here and see what I can like see if I get some hooligan shit, if I can get like into like the fucking doors or something. But this fucking fence they put up is not fucking around. They actually cut holes in the parking lot to set these things in here. But I've literally ridden around the entire perimeter of this thing. Now, that's an actual like lock on there. That's not like, you know, someone just looped it through and hoped nobody would look. Baja Design's headlight is not fucking around. Like, look, there's like low beam, high beam, and then like really fucking high beam. Oh, look at that, dude. Look at that, we can see forever down there. So my goal of getting into the mall is definitely a bust. That's not gonna happen. My new breather system mod. I don't have any, look at that, no oil coming out. This is where it would do, it would collect and it would come out right here. Last time I rode this thing, it was definitely just oil on the whole back side of it there. So nice to see we fixed that. Good chance you probably don't have an XR650R, but I think at least this kind of gives you the mindset that we're going for here. You know, trying to make the breather uphill and a little bit longer. All looks good.